Hello, welcome to the Restart Michigan webinar with Clark Hill. This is Kimberly Blackman, Engagement Coordinator with the Detroit Regional Chamber. Thank you for joining this session. The Chamber launched this series of webinars to help businesses across the state prepare to restart operations and return to work. I would like to thank our guest speakers from Clark Hill for volunteering their time to share their expertise. Before we get started, I wanted to make you aware that all participants are on mute, but you do have the option to submit questions directly to the speaker through the GoToWebinar control panel. I will now turn the webinar over to Melissa.
Great, thank you, Kimberly. And thank you for having us today to present on a topic that is very near and dear to both Jeffrey and me. So since we've been, since March really, when COVID started ramping up and everyone has been asked to work from home, we've seen a number of different attacks occur, and we've seen an increase in cyber attacks occur. In fact, I think there's some statistics out there that say that they've seen a 90% increase in ransomware attacks since 2019, and some other statistics that say that we are seeing ransomware attacks every 11 seconds on a company. And so companies need to understand and recognize that being prepared for a ransomware attack or some other type of cyber attack is incredibly important, because it truly is not a question of if you're going to be attacked, but when. So I run Clark Hill's cybersecurity data protection group. I have, together with the group, we've managed over 3,000 plus data breaches and security incidents for small companies to large companies. We work with companies every single day, some who have incident response plans, some who don't, some who have insurance, some who don't. So very familiar with the attacks that are occurring, the problems that companies see, and the legal obligations they need to comply with when facing an attack. Jeffrey?
I am not an attorney, although I seem to talk like one at times. My background, mostly military intelligence. I think I've been blamed for creating some of the cyber problem, so it's only natural that I seem to be working on those solutions now. And I will just tie into what Melissa said, is that often I hear, how does this happen to us? Everyone is a target of opportunity, and you're not always necessarily a target because someone sought you out. It's just that the World Wide Web is huge, and they cast a very wide net with these ransomware threat actors do, and it's no place is safe.
I like this quote because it really gives you an idea of what we're facing. So just imagine someone trying to break into your house. Now imagine it 60,000 times a day. Because of the type of technology and tools that are out there, hackers can just set something up to attack your environment in an automated process and or an automated way. So it truly is occurring thousands and thousands of times a day. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk a little bit about incident preparedness. We're going to run through a couple examples of cyber attacks, walking through what we see, how people respond, what some of the common pitfalls are, and then discuss the best lessons learned that we can provide you based on our experience. So why are we talking about incident response? Companies want more data. Customers want more accessibility. They want more availability. Really now we have taken our organizations from working primarily in offices and dispersing them across the country, working from home. So we've made ourselves bigger targets. Attackers' tactics keep changing. Cyber attacks really aren't going where they continue to go up, as we talked about a little bit from the statistic perspective. And preparing for an incident actually reduces the overall cost and damage associated with the cyber attack. Jeffrey, you want to run through this?
So, first and foremost, I think on this slide, what I want to point out is that cyber is a human problem where technology is the enabler, and technology continues to change, as does the environment that we all live and work in, which only makes the complexity of the threat even more challenging especially as more and more devices continue to connect where security is not built in. And so the key point we want to take away from in this one is that data breaches and incidents are not just IT's problem; they're an entire whole of organization problem. And so in the life cycle of data breach, you need to understand calmly as possible, really what happened, find out what kind of incident it is. Do you have the right team assembled? And who are your partners that need to be part of the team? How do you contain the incident? How do you remediate that incident and prevent it from occurring in the future? How do you notify your customers, employees, partners, and the public? The key here is that logistical execution is the key difference between a good and a bad response. This is why we're going to hear talking about having a plan and practicing that plan. Practice. Practice makes a team work effectively and efficiently, and you can also learn from those practices where you need to improve in the future.
So what's at stake really when you're looking at an incident? I mean, not just reputational damage, there can be customer safety. There was a report out of, I believe it was Germany, of a hospital that got hit by a ransomware attack, and they had to basically shut down all their systems, and in the process, they were rerouting patients to another hospital, and unfortunately, because of the length of time it took, a patient died in the process. So, there are true safety concerns when you're dealing with some sort of a cyber attack. You have the legal and compliance risk, depending on where you are from a supply chain perspective. It can also, you can be part of the interruption, or it can interrupt your ability to get what you need from your supply chain. Plus, we're talking about, data loss. If you're dealing with government contracts, you can deal with ITAR, EAR information. You can deal with customer employee information, trade secrets. Really, that's become more and more of a problem lately, because we're seeing with the ransomware attacks, this concept of extortion as well, where they take data and then demand monies not to release the data. And then, costs, legal costs, forensics, ransom payment, restoration, and overall impact from a financial perspective to the business.
The costs are just insurmountable, perhaps, in lots of different ways. From operational risk loss to revenue loss to reputation, those are all very hard to regain.
So we just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background really on and make sure we're all on the same playing field, if you will, before we run through what we consider the fun part of the presentation. So imagine yourself, you are part of a company, Lux Motors. It's an American automobile manufacturer, headquartered in Detroit, of course, with over 45,000 employees. You have operating centers in addition to Michigan, also in California and Texas. Really known for innovation and cutting edge technology. You have R&D initiatives. You're focused on self-driving technology and enhanced performance. So basically, and this sounds like a bit of a joke, but imagine it's your first week on the job and you're responsible for overseeing operations. Interestingly enough, there are many cyber attacks that we have dealt with where the person who's responsible for the IT or the CIO or whoever's heavily involved is on the job for one incident I'm thinking of, he was there for less than 48 hours before all of the systems came down. There's others that are newly on the job. It also seems to happen, the attacks happen when the IT group is, or the head of IT is on the way to vacation. We've seen them have to turn around many times on the way to the airport. So this is not beyond the realm of possibility here.
Also a Friday or a holiday.
Always a Friday or a holiday. Jeffrey?
So here we go, your first day, and you receive an email that purports to be from a security researcher who says that they've identified an exploit or a vulnerability in your system, and for a $1 million consultation fee, they're going to tell you where the vulnerability is and how to delete that particular data.
So Jeffrey,
So
tell the truth. Have you ever actually seen this?
this, though,
Yeah.
yeah, a few times. Consultation fee or advice. Researchers. The key I think here is that we've seen sophistication on the attacker side has become very very much improved, and so the spelling mistakes that we used to see in the past aren't there. Things start to look like legitimate emails and sound very legitimate, and therefore are easy to trick our minds into believing that there's something not necessarily nefarious here, but a red flag still.
Okay.
So what do you do?
So what do you do? And we put some options up here, some things to think about, right? Nothing, everyone knows these types of emails are fake. Call the help desk and report the email, call the cyber insurance carrier, call the FBI or local law enforcement. Most often we see A and B, and so do nothing, right? Everyone knows these types of emails are fake. I still laugh. About a year or so ago, an older attorney at a law firm had received an email from someone in China looking for, if the firm was willing to represent them, and they actually sent it around the office, and we all had a good giggle over it, but it still happened. So nothing, everyone knows the emails are fake. Really, when you see these types of emails, what you should be doing is sending them to the help desk and reporting the email, because if you received it, most likely somebody else received it.
But unfortunately, in this particular case, the help desk in Austin is one individual and is a bit overwhelmed, and so believes that by just putting it into the spam folder or notifying that it's spam and asking you to delete it will solve the problem. Did that work, Melissa?
No, not really. And here's something we really want to focus on is your ability to respond to an incident has a lot to do with training. So even help desk or the people who first see an email or the receptionist, they need to receive training, as well as people who are in your forensics or in your security department or your IT department or the CISO to really recognize and be able to respond to threats in real time to help protect the organization. So email is deleted, attacker gets a little mad and decides that they're going to do something else. So you receive then a pop-up note on your computer stating that all your files have been encrypted, and the only way to recover that is to pay $10 million within 48 hours. And then the note also says that your data will be published if the demand is not paid. So just something to think about here. What we're seeing attackers do nowadays is get into the system, and if you have cyber insurance, find your policy and identify how big your policy is, and then their demand will match the policy limits. And so we have seen a couple different demands that are 10 million because the insurance policy that responded to a cyber attack is 10 million. So Jeffrey, what the heck do we do now?
Well, you can run for the door. You can turn off your computer, call IT, or you disconnect from the network. And it's perhaps in C first and then B. And I'd say, especially in today's world, often we hear disconnect from the network and people power off anyway. The key is really looking, if you're using Windows, looking down to the right-hand corner of the screen and disconnecting from the wireless network. If you're hardwired, it's disconnecting the cable from the side. If you're using Mac, it's up in the upper right-hand corner, disconnecting from the network. That's what that means, leaving the computer running, but disconnecting it from the network in the event that the device itself has been encrypted, but it hasn't been able to fully spread across the network. And then to reach out and make a phone call to your IT department to seek additional advice.
Now, that's going to sound counter to probably what some people will tell you. The reason that we suggest disconnecting from the network instead of powering down is, one, if you power down, you can lose forensic artifacts that might be important to the investigation. The other thing too is sometimes it's actually better to let the encryption finish on the device, because stopping it in the middle might mean that you're not able to recover the data from that device if you need to use a decryption key on it. We see this a lot of time with things like SQL Server database. So it sounds a little counterintuitive, but there's actually a method to the madness. And then disconnecting the network hopefully will help you contain it so it doesn't spread elsewhere within the network. Unfortunately, in this particular scenario, you couldn't disconnect fast enough, so of course all your devices are encrypted.
Yes, so the IT, when calling the IT department, they have informed me that all of the systems here are encrypted, as well as our operations have been shut down, and we are effectively working on bricks. The telephones are shut down. We don't have any way to operate or communicate effectively. And at this point, that's when we often like to say is turn to look for that binder. You know what I mean by binder? Which is your incident response plan, which you've been practicing, but is pulling down that binder because having it online, everything is locked up, and having that binder has backup email addresses as well as phone numbers for our incident response team. So we've triggered the incident response plan and started calling the incident response plan and contacting them in the old-fashioned ways, perhaps walking over and talking to them in some situations.
Well, Jeffrey, let me pause you for a second, because I think that this is something that a lot of teams miss, right? So even when you practice, you have everybody together, you've kind of talked about it, you've worked through it, but think about it from a logistical perspective. And I think it was Alexander the Great who once said that, you know, if my campaign fails, the logisticians will be the first ones to die. And as a former logistics officer in the Marine Corps, I think logistics are incredibly important. But if your systems are down and you can't access your email and you don't have the phone numbers printed anywhere, how are you actually going to get in touch with those people that you need to get in touch with and trigger your plan? So you really need to think about what a worst case scenario looks like and be prepared to respond. And having that plan printed out and the numbers updated, you know, talking through what that initial communication is going to look like, if it's a text or something, that's incredibly important, because if you can't communicate, you can't really respond.
And that it goes back, Melissa, just is, you know, back to the practice. It's the more often you practice these, which I like to say is at least 4 times a year, even if it's small scale. It's that you can update the phone numbers, update the ways that you stay into communication, and also, you know, that you've got sort of you know, multiple binders perhaps spread around, but you're able to learn from those experiences and kind of try and stay ahead of it logistically.
You also want to do some of these things concurrently. So as you're, you know, triggering your incident response plan, activating your team, IT will start to isolate the network. You want to contact your cyber insurance carrier. You should have the policy printed out or the number listed as well, because it'll give you a contact number. You certainly want to engage with privacy counsel. Many policies call them breach counsel, to help you with investigating and responding to a ransomware attack or a cyber attack. From that perspective, what privacy counsel will do is help you engage computer forensic investigators and other resources under attorney-client privilege. A question that we get a lot is, well, when do I want to bring outside counsel into the discussion? There's no real black line, but my suggestion is before anything is communicated externally or you engage with anyone externally is when you want to bring counsel in, because you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself from any kind of external communication and that you're applying privilege to any kind of internal investigation. And then you really need to think about who do you need to communicate with. If your system is down, but you're the type of company where your business partners like upload to an FTP site or access something or are integrated with your system, they're going to immediately notice that the system is down. And so you need to make sure that you're prepared to communicate. You may need some sort of communication with employees. You have to be very careful, because if you tell employees that it's ransomware, they're going to go talk about it because it's the new interesting thing to do. And you may not be prepared for those external kind of news or media communications that then start coming your way. Often employees are a great part of the team, but sometimes they want to do things that they think are in the company's best interest, which it turns out they're not, because you're not quite ready. So thinking about who internally and externally you need to communicate with and what that communication needs to look like. And hopefully from a preparation perspective, you've thought through this and you're pre-prepared.
And I'm just back to that incident response plan, as we move to the next slide, is that often what we've seen this year is plans that will say you'll have a communication plan. It's including in that plan is the procedures for how you're going to address these various scenarios. And you can't anticipate everything, but it's how, who and how you're going to communicate is important, not just having a plan that says we will communicate.
So let's talk about this. We're talking about ransomware. We have a demand of 2 million on the table. We know that data has been taken. We're not quite sure what it is yet. So there's the whole question, to pay or not to pay. Most organizations, when you talk to them before they've been hit with an incident, will tell you, we do not pay, we're not going to pay criminals. And then when you get into the middle of an incident, the discussion is a little bit different. So if you have good backups, right, Jeffrey, I should be good, right? I can restore and I'm good to go. I don't need to pay, right?
Well, in theory, unfortunately, good backups could mean a lot of different things. It could mean that they are great backups. They just are going to take a very long time, 2 weeks in this particular case, in order for those to be set up. But are those backups up to date? Or were the backups deleted, or were the backups encrypted? Or what if, this true story, somebody forgot the password for the backups, and nobody could figure out what that password was, and they made that decision-making process take a little bit longer than it should, because there were just a lot of unknowns when it comes to backups, where they've been tested recently as well. It's having them is one thing, knowing that they work, that they're current and operational and segmented is another thing.
Yeah, lately we've been seeing attackers get into the system, navigate to the backups, delete the backups, hard delete them so you can't get them, or they encrypt the backups as well before they encrypt the rest of your system. We've seen backups where something failed in the device, and so the backups weren't actually working. We've seen, actually recently, we're working with a company who's had hired another company to help them with the backups. Turns out that they didn't implement that process, and the backups are from 7 months ago. So they've lost 7 months of data, and they really truly need that data in order to keep operating. Imagine that it's all your financials, it's all of your business contact information. The discussion then is, what's the price? What's the cost? Most attackers will negotiate with you, and there is a process to go through to make sure that if you do pay the ransom, you will get the decryption key, and the decryption key will actually work. Out of, I don't even know how many ransomware attacks, we've seen only one time where we did not get the decryption key. And frankly, that was because a client had reached out to the attackers, worked with another outside vendor company, hadn't done what we call the proof of process, where they provide some files and get the proof back that they can decrypt them. So the attacker just took the money and left. Every other time when we have paid the ransom, we have obtained a decryption key. And in fact, if you have problems with the decryption key, the attacker will actually work with you to try to fix it, to make sure it deploys through your environment. It sounds really weird, but this is a business to the criminals. They want it known that if you pay the amount, you will get a decryption key, and the decryption key will work. They also want that known from an exfiltration perspective, that if you pay the ransom, then they're not going to publish the data. So there is a process. Just because you're encrypted doesn't mean you're out of business, but you need to go through the process to make sure that you get what you think and need to decrypt your systems.
customer service is not dead in the cyber criminal space.
Not at all. And in fact, if you go on the dark web and you can go to some of the websites, you can even leave reviews on the criminal offerings that they have. So we already talked a little bit about this paying and not paying. So we also talked about how criminals who have your data will promise to delete it if you pay the ransom. On the other side, if you don't pay the ransom, they will release your data. And these are not good people. They will honor their bargain, but they are engaged in a criminal enterprise, and it's important to remember that. So, we've even worked with companies before who didn't want to engage with the attacker, didn't want to talk to them, and the attacker started contacting the owners directly. Owners didn't engage. They then started contacting the employees directly. The employees were instructed not to engage. Well, they had some of the family information as well, and they started contacting some of the kids. And so at that particular point in time is when the organization decided to reach out and start negotiating. Even if the organization is of the opinion that it's not going to pay and it's just going to deal with the fallout from the release of data, you can still engage with the attacker to buy yourself time to be prepared for whatever that looks like. In many instances, that kind of communication and interaction can buy a couple weeks, and those weeks can be key to make sure that your system is locked down, that the attacker is not in your system, that you've identified any data that they've taken, and that you've really started the recovery, and that you have all of the defensive communication protocols that you need in order to protect yourself if things do go public. So we put ransomware recovery tips, just assuming that this may be shared. There's just some things on here that we recommend that you take a look at and follow if you are hit with ransomware and you do need to recover. But we're not going to run through all of them.
I think I have this later. So we're not going to pay the ransom, Melissa.
Great.
So I'm busy trying to restore data from backups. And
well, they're starting to release the data online. So what do I do now?
That's not good. That wasn't anticipated in my incident response plan. But that data is the releasing it online. It's my breach counsel on site. Am I asking them questions?
Yes, I think it's a legal question, right? So we have to understand what data we think is at risk. We have to understand what the legal implications of the release of data might be. We have to identify any communications, external again or internal, that we need to make. If we haven't told our employees and they're starting to release data, we probably need to tell them by this point, because you will see online news media, and depending on how big the company is, maybe larger media, pick it up and start talking about it. So it is important to work with your privacy counsel, with your internal team, really understand what we think the type of data is, what the impact on the organization is for the release of data, and be prepared for any kind of media communications, because
yeah, I'm getting phone calls from business partners asking me questions, asking me to show that my network's clean, which I'm frantically trying to get my team to do. But I'm also trying to restore these backups. I'm communicating, trying to negotiate things down, and other calls are coming in. I'm seeing stuff online. I'm feeling overwhelmed.
So one of the common questions that we've seen with ransomware attacks, especially as it begins to get public or the business partners start to understand that you've been hit by attack, is the West questions: what happened? How did it occur? Can you share the indicators of compromise? There's some nuances there, because sometimes indicators of compromise or malware hashes will get uploaded to virus total, and it becomes public because the organization's name is associated with it, and that's obviously something we don't want. So there's various concerns and things that need to be talked about in order to really think about what information you want to share, how you want to share it, and anything you share external obviously isn't privileged. The other thing too is if you share data or you obtain data from other companies, they're going to ask you how you know that any data that you're providing or that they're receiving is secure. They will certainly ask questions about your email. Is your email environment secure? How do you know the email environment is secure? One of the things when we're working with forensic investigators that we ask them to also prioritize is the email environment, because if organizations can communicate via email, they can still, sort of do business. But if the organizations are going to terminate access or terminate your ability to communicate with them, then it obviously limits your ability to do business. We've seen it also with your vendors. So you get hit by a ransomware attack and you process payroll through a bank or ADP. We've seen those vendors terminate access until you can certify to them that your system is clean and that there's not a risk to their system. Now, we find that larger organizations understand a bit more, obviously because they've dealt with it most likely, and are a little more reasonable in their approach. Smaller organizations sometimes want to see everything, including the highly detailed technical forensic report, and it's being able to give them the information that they need while still protecting yourself and your organization and your business. And therefore, working with a forensic provider who can answer some of those questions in a less detailed, less technical way, oftentimes will get them to re-enable that access and re-enable that communication.
But my employees are really worried about not just getting paid, about their own information, and they're asking me questions and maybe starting to be very concerned about the future.
And I think that's part of it. When a lot of times when we talk about communications, we really are thinking primarily about external communications, but your internal communications are just as important. Your employees can be the first line of defense and really assist you with the process. You, of course, want to give them the right tools. You don't necessarily need to communicate everything to them. But if a business partner knows about the ransomware attack and they call an employee and the employee's like, I don't know what you're talking about, it looks like the organization doesn't know what it's doing. So we want to make sure that the employees are armed with the right kind of talking points. Oh, yes, we're aware of it. I know that they've engaged external forensics. We have someone who has been designated to answer any questions. I'll put you in touch with them. And then the communication also to employees is obviously, it's not just your information, it's my information too. We are looking into this right now. We don't know whether or not there's a risk to your information, but as soon as we determine that, we will certainly let you know. And that's kind of driven by the investigation. The other thing too that's important to remember from a communication perspective is when you're dealing with a building that has burnt down or been hit by a tornado or something, you can see the damage. You can see it, it's visible. And people can see the effort that is going on to recover and clean up. But when your system has been hit by an attack, people can't see what's going on in the back end. And they really don't still understand how much time it can take you to recover. Because you're not just restoring a server, you have to restore the server. You have to put the configurations back in place. You have to provide the access. You have to tie it into the other applications. There's all these other things that have to take place. And so part of the communication is helping not just internally, but externally understand that recovery from some sort of an attack is a process that takes time.
So the forensic folks have started to communicate with me. They identified that a Trojan was executed on a user workstation. In this case, actually, it was one of the receptionists, and the malware spread throughout the environment and eventually was able to gain administrative tools. And looks like that's how they took over and encrypted everything.
So, I mean, Jeffrey, I have antivirus. I mean, that's going to stop Trojans, right?
Sorry, antivirus, no. Only antivirus is only going to stop certain known signatures that are viral in nature, not necessarily some of these Trojans that come in pieces and are able to exfiltrate and download additional information to assemble themselves in the network. And so it's they're not these tools are not flawless, even though you have them in place to reduce the risk, but not necessarily catch everything, especially a lot of these malware and ransomware types, especially the evolving ones.
Well, I mean, the tools they deployed throughout the environment, that's all malware, right? I mean, antivirus should have caught some of that, shouldn't they?
In some cases, it should have, but when by that point, it actually had taken over some of the antivirus system itself and was able to stop it from being flagged and prevent that from operating, especially once they gained the administrative privileges.
Well, did they use any system tools against us?
They did, and that's sort of a lot of looks like in this particular case, what they had used was that this particular type of ransomware came from the system tools, so it looked like it was part of the system and was used to create the variants that was able to take over the entire network. So it looked like it was operating normally, but unfortunately, it didn't. The end result was not positive.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jeffrey.
I'm always full of good news.
Yes. So, we've already talked a little bit about notification requirements, kind of in the process of the incident. Obviously, contractual requirements. We find, remember, if your systems are encrypted, where are your contracts? They're probably encrypted as well. And many times those contracts are not located all in one area, and people aren't aware that there's a ton of different notice requirements in those contracts. So that tends to be a very big drain on time, was reviewing those and identifying who you need to notify. There's statutory notice requirements, and these are triggered not just by personal information, but by industry. So depending on the industry that you're in, there could be other requirements, or depending on the business partners that you work with. For instance, again, coming back to the government contracting side of it, or if you work with states or different departments, this can be problematic as well. So if you're kind of a sub of other prime contractors, and that triggers into the regulatory notice. And then there's business reasons, right? So if there is no, from just a purely business, not highly regulated industry perspective, there aren't requirements that you notify someone simply of the fact that a ransomware attack took place. But if it's going to impact your ability to communicate, to service your clients and customers, and they're asking questions, then there may be a business reason to communicate the fact that you had an attack. The other side of it too is if the attack that you've had, you believe is creating a risk to others. So where you operate as a vendor, and as a vendor you have access to another company's systems, and you have a username and password, and those appear to be compromised, then you certainly don't want there to be some sort of compromise on their system that leans back to the compromised credentials on your system. And so making sure that you're taking steps to protect and mitigate harm and downstream risk is important as well.
Melissa, how do I keep track of all this? I mean, I've got from a technical perspective, I'm trying to keep up with the latest, information and certification requirements. These all these notices of the changing threat landscape. I mean, how do I manage all this at this point?
That's a very good question. Honestly, the incident response plan should address a number of these items so that you know where to go for the information and you know how to get it. If you haven't had that time to really go through that process, reaching out to privacy counsel or counsel who have experience in this area are going to be able to kind of guide you through that process as well. But you really need to do the back end work logistically to make sure that you are organized and prepared to respond, and put the time and effort into making sure that your incident response plan addresses these concerns on these requirements.
So again, making sure in my incident response plan that I've got procedures, not just a plan or a policy that says I will do certain, I will investigate or I will make notice as required.
Yeah, I mean, we see many times in the incident response plans it says, provide notification as required. And I'm like, well, have we thought about what that looks like? It's a discussion. I mean, because on the other side of it, we see businesses that are operating that you have different business operations, and some of the business operations don't know what the other arm does. And then all of a sudden you have an incident and you find out that you have to notify somebody else because this business operation has entered into a contract that you weren't aware of because you don't have tight control of the contracts. I mean, it happens. Just things we need to be aware of and try to identify ahead of time. So,
Well, it's been a long
Jeffrey,
3 weeks.
yeah, I mean, what's the
But
average
we
time for
finally got the
recovery if you
backups
have
up.
a ransomware attack?
And nobody's really slept, but we finally got the backups up. They're not, they're now 3 weeks behind, but we got them up and running.
Is that 3 weeks normal for restoration?
We were pretty quick in this particular case. Thankfully, we were running, we're a satellite operation and had a reasonably new and homogeneous environment, and the forensic and response team, got us information early, and those backups did work. And although it took us time, but we did have a plan, and 3 weeks wore us out, but we did get it back up and running. Although we've heard in some places it takes maybe a month or two. In other places,
really,
even longer.
the fallout from an incident can a variety of different ways, right? But in addition to the business lost income, if people are salaried, you're continuing to pay them. There's been concerns before about continuing to pay wages if people aren't working. Is that going to be covered from an insurance perspective? There's reputational harm depending on how broad and public it was. There's potential litigation. So if the attack that impacted your systems impacted others' ability to provide services or do work, there can be litigation, and we're certainly starting to see more of that in the court system, although it is relatively new. There can be regulatory investigations. You can lose employees if you're not able to pay them or they're not able to work. So there can be a variety of different impacts from it. However, if you handle an incident well and you're clear and transparent in what you're doing, these losses can really be mitigated and reduced. I think there's some statistics out there that actually show that by responding well to an incident, well, let me actually forget statistics. How about a story? So, for instance, we know when Target had its ransomware attack, the stock went down. I think what many people don't realize is when Home Depot had their incident shortly after that, their stock went up. So you can respond well to an incident and have an impact that isn't as catastrophic as those who aren't prepared.
And I think that this lesson there, we talked about the incident response plan, but I think it's having having plans, policies, and procedures in place, having a team that practices and works together and understands how to do that, and as well as a trusted external parties that certainly helped out in this particular case, because panic was setting in really, especially as everybody was getting tired.
I mean, honestly,
okay.
Don't panic. Like, no, really, I mean, don't panic, because others have made it through and you'll make it through as well. We talked about having a physical copy of the plan and following your plan. That's important. Really, it's incredibly important to also bring in the right team. We have companies who bring in, someone who says that they do forensics, and it turns out that they really do forensics, and that can be an impact on the investigation. Notifying your carrier, working with experienced privacy counsel, these are all important things. And then, certainly most important, being mindful of communications. Once you say something, you can't take it back. And again, as we talked about, you can see when a building is burned down and they're starting to recover, but you can't see it from a system perspective. And what you know today might change tomorrow. Well, we thought we were going to get that server up, but no, we can't get that server up because we're missing something. So you need to be very careful in the communications and only communicate what you're absolutely certain about. So I think that's,
go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, I think that kind of wraps everything up. I just wanted to see if we had any questions.
While we're waiting for questions, I would say too, to build on what Melissa said, is that from a technical perspective, not every forensic organization or IT response team can address the same situation. So it's not a one size fits all. The types of incident, it really defines and dictates who should be responding.
So Jeffrey, there's one question here. Yep. And I thought we would get this question, but is there something other than antivirus that we should have on our computers? We're a family business with no IT department. I was thinking an EDR solution.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different options, and I'd say first and foremost is, besides antivirus, is a sort of a holistic system that addresses both malware, looks at changes in signatures, is not a free system, unfortunately, but one that really looks at I'm trying not to name names, but one that looks at the system holistically, beyond just viruses, is constantly updating the various signatures and threats that are out there. There are firewalls that we recommend, whether those be software or hardware pieces, and VPNs. And I would say that those are sort of the low-hanging fruit, if you will. And
I think too, Jeffrey, right? One of the solutions that we're aware of is the endpoint detection and response. So it's heavier, more holistic type.
And
there's a couple different versions out there.
Yeah, EDR systems really are the, especially with the AI additions that are going in here in 2021. That's probably some of the best solutions, although they tend to, the price. You need to understand that you're paying for security. But when you're anything for free or very cheap, you're going to get what you pay for.
Yep. And so I think, Jeffrey, another question we have is if we can discuss liability related to an email hacking event that results in a fraudulent customer payment to the hacker. So from a liability perspective, the answer to that is the good old legal, it depends, but it really depends on how the attack occurred. So if there was a compromise on the company's end that led to the fraudulent wire transfer, that's normally where courts will find most of the liability falls. So for instance, if my company was hacked, but the information in my account was then used to get somebody else to send a fraudulent wire transfer, most of the liability at the end of the day, the courts are going to look at me because, but for the hack, they wouldn't have obtained the information. If we're talking about a spoofed email and there weren't internal controls, and there weren't internal controls in place or something along those lines, that may shift the liability. But there's some case law out there on this. It really just depends on a ton of different factors, and we would certainly need more time to talk about that.
So Melissa, there's another question, and probably we could both take this. What are the most common mistakes that we see that organizations make in a response? I'll let you go first, and then I'll add my 2 cents.
Well, I think we talked through them on the avoid common pitfall response, right? Not having the plan, not having it printed out, not having identified the people that you need to work with, having that 1-800 number or that red phone basically ready, communicating things that are not true that you then need to take back, and panicking, frankly.
And I'll just add is that while you may have the skill set in-house to handle the initial response, we often see that is, because of panic, because adrenaline rush gets there, that skill set may not always be the right choice, and are going off of instinct, may not necessarily be going off of current best practices, and have made mistakes that have compromised the artifacts or the system as a whole.
So I think it seems like I think we answered all the questions. Kimberly, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
Great.
Hi.
So thanks everyone for letting us talk to you about some of our favorite subjects. We obviously really enjoy and are really passionate about this particular subject. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to Jeffrey or I directly.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you everyone for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Clark Hill, to Melissa and Jeffrey. I want to let all of the participants know that after this webinar, you will receive an email from me with a link to today's discussion in case you want to review any of the information that was shared. Also, please visit our website, DetroitChamber.com, for upcoming schedules for Restart Michigan webinars and more valuable information to help your business return to work. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Stay happy and healthy.
Bye.